Alrighty, today we are in the 1969 Porsche 912. So, a few notes before we get out on the road. The 912 is powered by a 1.6 liter 4-cylinder Type 616/39 B4 engine that produces roughly 100 horsepower. It's got a dog-legged 5-speed manual, but it only weighs 2,127 pounds. There's no power steering, no power brakes, no driver aids at all. The 912 was meant to be the entry-level Porsche after the 356 was discontinued because it was believed that the increased cost of the flat 6 and the 911 models would be too much of a market shock and they wouldn't be able to sell. So they introduced the 912 as a more affordable model with the 4-cylinder in the back. Internally, this car was known as the 902, the same way we are currently with the 992 and just left the 991. However, as Porsche files will tell you, there was a bit of an issue with Peugeot claiming to own any car and any model name that was 3 numbers with a 0 in the middle. So the Porsche 901, which was the original 911, ended up being changed to the 911, and this was changed from the 902 to the 912. So those are my notes for this car, and I think I caught a gap in the traffic, so let's get rolling and see how she drives. Well, the first thing you notice in a car like this really is the lack of power. Steering has no power. The brakes have no power. The engine has no power. So if the audio is a little hard to hear at times, it's because I'm having to rev the absolute nuts off of this engine to be able to keep up with traffic. That said, I do actually really like the steering feel in this car. The complete lack of power steering is a beautiful thing, because in a car like this, you can't get a thrill out of going fast like you can out of a modern Porsche. So instead of getting a thrill from, doing 1,000,000 miles an hour, the pleasure in driving this car that you notice immediately, and I've been driving this car around all day, is that you just feel connected in the same way you would in any of these sort of earlier, really analog sports cars, even ones with a lot more power. The lack of power brakes, though, I've never felt that they weren't going to stop this car because, again, as I said, it's only 2,127 pounds curb weight, allegedly. And so not having the power assist on the brakes, you never feel like you're not going to stop, but you do have to press that pedal a lot harder than you would in another car. And that's just sort of the trend in this car that I've noticed, is that it's not, I don't want to say manhandling, because that sort of implies that you're sort of really beating on it, but this is not a car that you get in and just drive easily. It is a car that takes work. The gearbox, we'll get to the gearbox later, but it's a pain in the ass. The brakes are hard. You need a lot of force. The steering, it's not bad at speed, but as any car without power steering is, it's a bit of a handful when you're not moving very quickly. Taking a step back now, I've never been a Porsche guy. I've driven the Taycan Turbo S, I've driven Cayennes, Panameras, GT3, 911T, I've driven 964 Turbo, and Bad Boys car, and I have never really gotten it. The Porsches have always been, they're fast and they are incredibly quick. Like I said, they're just fast. But that's it to me. I've never really understood the passion that so many guys and girls around the globe have for this brand. So what I was hoping for with this car is to get a little taste of it. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. Getting back to the actual driving experience of this car, one of the things you notice, aside from the complete lack of power, is that the suspension really isn't as harsh as you would expect. I got in this car after, well, the last sports car I was driving, for context, was a 95 348 Spider that I reviewed over on DRIVETRIBE, and that was hard. I got out of that car after putting over 100 miles on it, and my back was sore as hell. This car, definitely not. The seats are decently well sprung. The suspension isn't too bad. This one is lowered slightly, as according to the owner, so it is a little rougher, I'd imagine, than other ones like it, but it really isn't too harsh inside. The harshness really comes from the fact that there is no sound deadening. There's really nothing to help you, and so as you can see, it's just clunk, 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 clunk anywhere you go. The biggest drawback in this car really just is the gearbox. I've been driving this car now for 55 miles, and it is still just a massive pain in my ass. It's not hard to get it into gear all the time, though sometimes it is tricky to finesse it in without getting a crunch. The real problem is figuring out what gear you're in, and perhaps that is something that I just do need more time to get accustomed to with this car. But going into first, it's dogleg, which not that weird. I've driven it before in other vehicles, and it's not too uncommon in Ferraris and other race cars of this period. But getting it down into first, you have to pull it so far close to you, you're basically hitting the seat when you put it down into first, and then it sort of swings back a little bit. So if you put it in third, it looks like almost the exact same position. And now at 45 miles an hour, I'm in high gear, fifth gear, and again, the knob position is maybe a total of 2 centimeters in difference between first and fifth gear. So it is really annoying, and you are going to lug this motor and pull off in third a handful of times when you first get into driving one of these. Reverses isn't as bad, but it is just a pain in the ass it sort of loops around, which is odd. In the Volkswagen transmissions, it used to be you just pushed it down and then you would be able to get in there no problem. But for this one, I don't know why you have this giant looping pattern. Then second to fourth is also very narrow. You don't miss that one as much, but when you're trying to drive sprightly, or even if you're going through some hilly areas like I do living where I do, if you try to get down a gear, you can end up putting it in fourth, or if you're trying to get down into third, you can put it in first or fifth, and just, it's a pain in the ass. Probably something that you would eventually get used to, but it is my biggest gripe. The real experience with this car is a bit of an interesting one because it's not fast. It isn't. Getting it up to freeway speeds when I was bringing it home last night, that was a bit of a chore, and you can hear right now I'm having to rev the nuts off of it, as I mentioned, just to, keep it up in the pace of traffic. But it just feels so engaging to drive. Normally I can just talk. Anyone will tell you that. But in this car, I'm actually having to think a lot more about what I'm doing. And that actually is kind of surprising to me, because even with the 348 that I reviewed, check it out on DriveTribe if you haven't, I felt pretty comfortable and relaxed in it, even though it was far harsher and far more in my face all the time. This car, it's noisy from that from that 4-cylinder engine back there. There's no padding in here, there's no frills, and I can really see the appeal of why somebody would like it. And again, I actually really do like these analog sports cars because you can have fun without going to jail. That F12 I reviewed way back in the day, that car, if I wanted to push it and feel like I was exploiting all the speed out of it, I would be doing 120, 130 miles an hour everywhere. In this car, I can be doing 35, and it feels like I'm going through in an F1 car. It really does, because I'm having to manhandle it, and it feels like I'm at the limit. Am I? Probably not. I think a lot of it does come from the the taller tires that are on these, and that wide sidewall that sort of gives in. But it is really just a lot of fun to drive, even if it will leave you exhausted. It's definitely not a car to take all the way up to Monterey from here in LA. If you are willing to put up with that noise and all the rattles and bangs, you definitely have a lot of fun going through some of those curves up Highway 1. Now, I said earlier that one of my goals with this drive and this review was to see if I could get a little more insight into why people love Porsche so much, why they worship the 911 and this platform. Do I understand that after this video? I still don't. I don't. I think this is a very fun car to drive, and I could get why people would flock to these and why they have gone from $20,000 10 years ago up to $50,000, $60,000 for a nice one today. Would I spend that kind of money on one of these? I don't think so. I think maybe if they were still in that $30,000 range, I think I could really see the appeal and really encourage others to try it out. But for me, at 50 or 60, that's just brushing too close to that 348 territory. And again, you'd get a similar experience just with a lot more power. But for me, the big thing with Porsches is I've never understood the magic. To some, and many everywhere around this planet, it's the holy grail of brands. It's the ultimate sports car. And I get parts of that. I think this is a fantastic car to drive. I think it's a lot of charm in it. But I don't feel that little X factor that you get from some of these other cars. I think that just means that maybe I have to do a little more searching within the Porsche brand, because I remember when I drove the 911T back when that came out, I remember thinking that was such a fun car to drive. Oh, see, pulled off in third. But anyway, getting back to that 911T, I really enjoyed that car, and I really enjoyed the Taycan that I took around the Porsche Experience Center here in Carson. But they're not cars that I went home and lusted after. They weren't cars that I started searching for on and any other websites that aren't paying me any money to plug them. And this car, will I do that? Does this car have that little pull for me? I think it does. And I am kind of curious to see what these are pulling in. But again, like I said, knowing the market and having done a little research with the Haggerty tools, they're just a little out of that price range where I think they're really worth it. Unless you are somebody who gets that love of the Porsche brand. Well, I've reached my destination, and I think that brings us to the end of our little foray into the Porsche world. This is a good car. It has a lot of charm. But I just don't have that X factor yet from Porsche. So maybe that just means we have to try some more Porsches and see if we can figure that out. Until then, feel free to check out my article on DRIVETRIBE, where I'll be going more into the drive I did this morning with this car and some of my other thoughts about the vehicle. Please do like, comment, share, subscribe, all that BS, and we'll see you soon.